This is the audio version of Station 2, Traits, Genes, and Alleles. Directions: use your slide notes, pictured in this video, as well as your book, which will be read in this video, to answer questions about traits, genes, and alleles. Questions to answer. What is the one word that you can use to describe the word trait? In your own words, what is a gene? Where do you think a gene is located? Hint, think about the last chapter. What is an allele? How are all three of the terms above, trait, gene, and allele, related? Come up with an analogy to remember the three vocab words, trait, gene, and allele. Section 11.1, Genes and Alleles. When doing genetic crosses, we call each original pair of plants the P, or parental generation. Their offspring are called the F1, or first filial generation. Filius and filia are Latin words for son and daughter. What were Mendel's F1 hybrid plants like? To his surprise, for each trait studied, all the offspring had the characteristics of only one of its parents, as shown in figure 11-3. In each cross, the nature of the other parent with regard to each trait seemed to have disappeared. From these results, Mendel drew two conclusions. His first conclusion formed the basis of our current understanding of inheritance. An individual's characteristics are determined by factors that are passed from one parental generation to the next. Today, scientists call the factors that are passed from parent to offspring genes. Each of the traits Mendel studied was controlled by a single gene that occurred in two contrasting varieties. These variations produced different expressions or forms of each trait. For example, the gene for plant height occurred in one form that produced tall plants and in another form that produced short plants. The different forms of a gene are called alleles. Dominant and recessive alleles. Mendel's second conclusion is called the principle of dominance. This principle states that some alleles are dominant and others are recessive. An organism with at least one dominant allele for a particular form of a trait will exhibit that form of the trait. An organism with a recessive allele for a particular form of a trait will exhibit that form only when the dominant allele for that trait is not present. In Mendel's experiments, the allele for tall plants was dominant and the allele for short plants was recessive. Likewise, the allele for yellow seeds was dominant over the recessive allele for green seeds. Figure 11-3. Mendel's F1 crosses. When Mendel crossed plants with contrasting traits, the resulting hybrids had the traits of only one plant. When Mendel crossed a round and a wrinkled pea plant, he saw only round offspring. When Mendel crossed yellow and green peas, he produced only yellow peas. When Mendel crossed peas with a seed coat that was gray and white, the resulting offspring were all gray. When Mendel crossed smooth pods with constricted pods, the resulting pods were all smooth. When Mendel crossed pea pods that were green with pea pods that were yellow, the result were all green pods. When he studied flowers, he studied flower position, axial, where the flowers were throughout the plant, and terminal, where the flowers were only at the ends of the branches. When those were crossed, the resulting plants all had axial flowers. And finally, when he studied plant height and crossed tall plants with short plants, the result were all tall plants. So to practice our vocabulary, if you take a look at all of these headings, seed shape, seed color, seed coat, pod shape, pod color, flower position, and plant height, these are the genes. Each of these types, round, wrinkled, yellow, green, gray, white, smooth, constricted, green, yellow, axial, terminal, tall, short, these are the alleles, the two different forms of the gene. So the gene may be for seed shape, and the alleles are round and wrinkled. This is the slide from your notes that your directions referred to. Describe the following terms and how they relate to genetics. A trait, a specific characteristic that varies from one individual to another. Crosses, mating between parents. Hybrid, offspring of crosses between parents with different traits. So crossing a tall plant with a short plant would produce a hybrid plant. True breed, offspring of crosses between parents with identical traits. So crossing two short plants would result in a short plant that was also true bred. They have the same alleles. Genes, chemical factors that determine traits. And alleles, different forms of the gene. So the gene could be for tall plants, the alleles would be tall and short.